I'm Dave Kalland, President of Stoughton Historical Society. It is October 26, 2015, and we are located at the Luke Stoughton House in Stoughton, Wisconsin, and I will be telling you a little about the history of the area and the Luke Stoughton House. We are standing outside of the house, and the house is located at 315 Cooper's Causeway along the Catfish Creek. Now, I'm sure most of you do not know where that is in Stoughton, because now Cooper's Causeway is called North Division Street. It was nicknamed or named Cooper's Causeway because Mr. Cooper was mayor of Stoughton. At the time it was upgraded, so everybody called it Cooper's Causeway, but now it's called North Division Street. And Catfish Creek is the Yahara River that runs through Stoughton. In 1888, the state legislature renamed the Catfish Creek to Yahara River, which means Yahara means catfish in Native American language, in Menominee Indian language. Also in 1888, at the same time, the state legislature named the Madison lakes, like Lake Higanza, Lake Wabisa, Lake Mendota, and Lake Monona. The first lake, Lake Higanza, was called the first lake, Lake Wabisa the second lake, and so on up through till 1888. Then they gave them the existing names, which are also Native American names. If you look behind me across the river, that was called Tramp Hollow. And right along Tramp Hollow there, you'll see the railroad tracks. And it was called Tramp Hollow because tramps and hobos would jump off and on the train right there along the tracks and camp out in that area. There's a fellow in Stoughton by the name of Oscar Fortin who grew up just down the street in the area of Fortin Street and Page Street, and as a child he would sneak down to Tramp Hollow and talk to the guys that were camping out there, and if they were eating some beans or something, they would offer him something to eat. We also had gypsies camping in the Stoughton area. They would camp out on the northwest corner of County Trunk A and Veterans Road. There's a hollow area there with a bunch of trees, and gypsies would camp out there. But they were only allowed to stay there about 3 days because they would rob you blind. You couldn't trust them at all. I just heard a story about one family. She would wash clothes and lay the clothes out on the lawn to dry, and the gypsies would come along and steal the clothes. But they would steal you blind, but the tramps and hobos, they were pretty trustworthy. The railroad tracks behind me is a train that went from Stoughton to Madison. We got the tracks laid to Stoughton in 1853. We had railroad service before Madison did. The tracks in Stoughton was laid in the late fall, early winter of 53. Then in the early spring, they were laid to Madison. It was called the Mississippi Railroad at the time, because it went from Milwaukee-Mississippi Railroad, because it went from Milwaukee to La Crosse. We'll turn around here and take a view of the outside of the Luke Stoughton House. And this is not the original site of the Luke Stoughton House. It is called Luke Stoughton House because Luke Stoughton was a founder of Stoughton in 1847, and this is the first house he built. He was not a Norwegian. He was a Yankee from Weatherfield, Vermont, and he had did mechanic as a trade, or that was his employment. And when he was in Vermont, he heard about the fertile farmland and cheap land in this area. So he came out here in 1838 and bought a farm between Edgerton and Janesville, and moved his wife here, Eliza Page, which is how we got Page Street from his wife's name. Moved his family here onto the farm, and after a few years, Eliza didn't like being on the farm. She was afraid of the Indians, and she didn't want to be isolated. So he sold the farm and moved into Janesville and started the real estate and mercantile business. And at that time he wandered up here along the Catfish Creek, which is now called Yahara River. And he liked the area because there was water power for a sawmill and grist mill. So he bought 800 acres for $2.60 an acre. And he developed what we have now as City of Stoughton. Before Luke bought this property, it was owned by Daniel Webster, who was a politician from the East Coast. And Daniel Webster also owned the property down at Cooksville. But he lost all the land due to back taxes. So Luke bought it and he built this house. It was originally on the northwest corner of Main and Division Street. And moved his family into it. Then in 1875, he sold the house to Ole Olson Aussie. And Mr. Aussie moved the house from northwest corner of Main and Division down to the northwest corner of Jefferson and Forest Street. But can you imagine moving a house or any building in 1875? I assume they used oxen or horses to pull it, and probably had logs and rolled it on the logs under the house, or made the logs into skids and pulled it on the skids to that location. There's an Aussie family member living in the house until the early 1970s. And at that time, the property was bought by Jensen's Furniture, and they were going to expand their furniture business, and the house was destined to be demolished. Local residents heard about that, so they didn't want the founder of Stoughton's house being demolished, so they formed the Luke Stoughton Society and raised funds to have the house moved. They were able to raise enough funds, but then they had to find out where to move it to, so they approached the city, and it was suggested moving it to Mant Park or down by the swimming pool by Mant Park, or Veterans Park by Riverside Cemetery. And none of those three places was suitable to the city, and the city suggested this area along the Catfish Creek or Yahara River. So it was moved to this location in 1974, and a few years later the Luke Stoughton Society disbanded and gave the house to the Stoughton Historical Society. So since that time, the Stoughton Historical Society has maintained it and has refurbished it inside and have artifacts in there for display. We do not have set schedules for it to be open for the public. It's by appointment only, because we don't have enough volunteers to have it open all the time. And so the house was completely gutted out a few years ago by the Historical Society members, and all the studs and floor joists were reinforced, and we got it put back together and painted on the inside and moved the artifacts in there. And we have had some special occasions here and meetings at this location. It's such a nice area along the river here. So now I guess we can go inside. Well, before we go inside, if you look down to my left down the street along the river, there's a stone building down there, which was the changing house for swimming in the river. There was no lifeguards, but kids were allowed to go swimming in the river. One half of the building was for the girls for changing, and the other half for the boys. But now there's a city ordinance. You are not allowed to wade in the river even. But at that time you could go swimming, and the older children would keep an eye on the younger ones so they wouldn't get hurt. And also the older kids would go down to what's called the Highland Building or Tremley Building on the south side of Main Street right along the river, and climb up the fire escape on the river side of the building and jump into the water off the fire escape. To my knowledge, nobody ever got hurt doing it, but good potential there. And that Tremblay building or Highland building I'm talking about was also the department company store. It was one of the biggest and best mercantile stores between Milwaukee and Prairie du Chien. When people would take the train from Milwaukee to Prairie du Chien, this was about halfway, so they would get off the train and do their shopping here at the department company or the Hales Dry Goods, which is in the middle of on the south side of Main Street, in the middle of the 100 West Main block. We'll go inside now and look at some of the artifacts and see what we can discover inside. We'll start in this room. This is, I guess you would call, it would have been the parlor. And they would use this for their daily use, like a living room. They also had a formal living room we will be entering shortly, but this will be their daily living room. And right here in front of me is a sewing machine, a treadle sewing machine. And you got the spool of yarn or spool of thread here, and you would have to thread through these connections here, these pulleys, and go down and stick it through the eye of the needle. And to operate it, you would have to turn this wheel to start it, and there's a belt from this wheel down to this bigger wheel, and you'd be sitting here and your feet would be on this pedal here, and your feet would rock back and forth, and that would make the needle go up and down for sewing. And next to it we have a yard winder, and you would take the yarn and wind it, and it would count how many turns it would go around. There's a little arrow on the side here that it clicks as it goes around, and it would click and the arrow would move, and then you would know how much yarn you had in on the winder. Then you would take it off and put it in what they called a skein, yarn skein. And next to it we have a spinning wheel for spinning wool into yarn. Some of the pieces are missing on it, but they would use that for making yarn. Just about all the women would do their own sewing and make their own clothes. They would buy the flour at the local grocery store, and the flour would come in flour sacks, and quite often the sacks would be made into dresses for their daughters. And next to the spinning wheel we have one of the first colored TV sets in Stoughton. This belonged to Doug and Shirley Bickley, who had a appliance store on the west side of Stoughton in what is called the Plaza. And this was one of the first colored TV sets. It's very heavy. And RCA built the first color TV set in 1954. And Stoughton didn't get a TV station until 1953, which was channel 27, WKOW, in Madison. On the top of the TV set, we have rose mauling. That's Norwegian rose painting. This particular piece came from McDonald's here in Stoughton. When the McDonald's was first built, they had artificial beams on the ceiling, and had some of the local rose maulers paint areas of the beams. My mother was one of the rose maulers, Beatrice Cullen, then Ethel Qualheim was another one. Barb Morgan, Artist Fundeller, and there's a couple others I don't remember offhand. But then after a few years, the McDonald's changed their mind, didn't want Norwegian decor in McDonald's, so they tore the beams out, or the artificial beams, and they're going to throw them away, and heard about it, so we confiscated the rose mauling part of it. They also had pictures of Norway and Norwegian dancers on the walls, which they got rid of also. And here we have a typical baby buggy, wicker baby buggy, and it's got side windows in it, so the baby could look out and see what's going on outside if she was laying in there. But notice the big wheels on it, and got the springs here, so not a real rough ride on it. And next to that we have a early record player. This would have music on it. This is a typical record. That was a 78 RPM record. In later years they had a smaller record, which was probably about this big, which was a 45. And you would put it on this peg here through the hole, and this would be the needle here. Raise that up. Here you can see the needle, and you'd put the needle on here, and you would turn on, the record would turn, and music would come out of it. Next to that, we got a child side saddle to put on horses. This was used by Fannie Williams, who lived up on the north side of Lake Eganza at Sugar Bush, which is now Lake Eganza State Park. But this would go on the horse like this, and the child would sit right here with her leg against here. You got the stirrup here, and the child could hang on here. And this would be for a girl. That way she could keep her feet together. But Mr. Williams up at Lake Eganza State Park is the fella that built the Carriage House, which was right along the railroad tracks on Williams Drive, and it was located halfway between the outlet of the river or the locks and go north in the bend of the road there. It was halfway in between there on the west side of the railroad tracks. There is a walking path there in the state park, and if you look closely through the brush, you can see where the Carriage House was. Back in the 70s, the state bought the property there, and one of the local clubs in town approached the state to restore it, wanted permission so they could restore it. And they kept after the state. Finally, the state consented to that they could restore it. They got permission on Wednesday, went out to start restoring it on Friday. The state tore it down the day before on Thursday, so that Carriage House was lost. We have quite a few pictures of it at our museum at 324 South Page. And on the wall above the record player, we have a picture of the Stoughton Depot, which was built in 1913. And this is the tobacco warehouse alongside of it, advertising tobacco. And you got the horse pulling the carriage here. And that's the second depot that was built in Stoughton. The first one was built right across the street, and the building is still there. And that was the first depot across the street. And this was built in 1913 and used until 1972, when passenger service quit coming through Stoughton and all the other towns. There was a federal law that all the local train service had to quit operating, and that's when Amtrak came into serving the communities. In front of the door, we got a typical trunk that the immigrants would use when they immigrated to America. And you notice this trunk has a rounded top. Some of them have a flat top. But after a few of the immigrants came to America, they discovered that if they had trunks with a rounded top, their possessions in the trunk would be near the top of the pile, so they could get at it, have access easier to it. So in the later years of the immigrants coming over, most of them had a rounded top, because it's pretty hard to stack anything on a round surface. Next to it, we got a picture of the ski jump in Stoughton. It was the tallest wooden ski jump in America. It blew down May 7th, 1914. And it was 128 feet from the ground up to the top of the scaffolding. That was located on the east side of Stoughton in what is now Venable, at the corner of Severson Drive and Severson Lane. And they would have competition, at least one competition every winter, and people would come from all over to jump there, from Norway, Denmark, and all over to jump. And right below that we got another rose mold board from the McDonald's. In here we got probably one of the first somewhat of a computer. It's a typewriter for typing letters. And as you push the key, this arm would come up and hit the ribbon, and you'd have paper in here, and there'd be ink in the ribbon, and that letter would be displayed on the paper. And in the display case, we have some artifacts that was found in this area, because before, many years ago, this was a dump or a landfill. And so if you do any digging, you don't have to go very deep, and you find artifacts like the old bottles here and glass insulators. And we also have clippers for cutting hair, hand clippers. You would take it and squeeze your hand together to make it cut the hair. And down below we have gas lights that would hang from the ceiling. And the gas would come out of the nozzle down on the end here, and you'd light it, and that would be your light. We'll move into the formal living room here now, which was only used for special occasions or special guests that came to visit you. And this particular living room does have a heat in it, has a stove, which was used in this house. It was Luke Stoughton's stove that used in this house. Of course, it is not hooked up to be used. We wouldn't want to use it for hazards. And we got the settee set here in the lady's dress. And we also have the jug. If you wanted a little wine and you brewed your own, you put it in the jug and put the corn cob in the top to keep it sealed up, keep the bugs out. And before electricity, you'd have a lamp like this for light. You'd put kerosene in this part of it, in this hole here, and you'd light the wick there, and that would be your light. It gave off as much light as maybe a flashlight, but that would be the only light in the room. And if you went to another room, you would probably take this light or this lantern with you to the other room. And over here we have a pump organ. If you that would be for the well-to-do people. They would maybe have a piano or a pump organ. You would sit on the stool, then you would pump the pedals here to get air in the bellows, and then here's the keys for playing the organ. But that was only for the well-to-do people. And we'll go back into the dining area. But before I go there, here's pictures of Luke Stoughton and his wife Eliza Page, which, like I said earlier, that's how we got Page Street. And this, we won't go up there, but I'll just show you what the typical stairway was going upstairs. It was steep and narrow. And at our museum at 324 South Page, which was the first church built in Stoughton in 1858, that's the type of stairs we have in our museum going from the basement to the main floor. So the steps are very narrow, and you almost had to walk sideways with your feet. So that's going upstairs. Here we have an electric heater that was invented in Stoughton by Clark Osterhild, and he lived out on Skyline Drive, probably about half mile off of Highway B on the right-hand side. He was quite an inventor, and he also invented the electric hot water heater that still has a name on it, the Clark hot water heater. So This is we got a couple others of his heaters, which are small triangle ones. They're at the museum and at the depot, but this was a larger one. In here we got a roll-top desk that you would sit here and write your letters. We got the quill pens here, and you would write your letters and do your personal paperwork. And here's a picture of when this house was being repaired or upgraded. And right above us, you can't see it, but there must have been a stove here at one time, because it shows there had been a fire right here. And this is the rafter. It's a quarter sawn log, which still has the bark on it, and that is still up there. And next to that is a picture of Main Street, looking east at the Main and Division Street, and that is 1915 Memorial Day Parade. And the one next to it is a team of oxen on Main Street, and they are sitting in front of the stone Turkish bath, which is located across from a little west of the city hall on the other side of the street. Turkish bath. And this is a picture of intersection of Main and Division Street. This would be the southwest corner of it. This is a northwest corner, which was the First National Bank, and that burned in 1966. Took pretty much half a block there. I was at that fire, and they had fire departments from all the surrounding areas, and they were even pumping water out of the river, trying to control the fire. And so this would be the northeast corner where the pharmacy is. Right now it's McGlynn's Pharmacy, but at one time it was Sheldup Pharmacy, then it was Falk Pharmacy, and then Anderson Pharmacy, and there's one in between there too. It's McGlynn's Pharmacy now. And this would be looking east on Main Street. And we also got the corner hutch there, which you could store your dishes in it, and silverware, etc., or even books if you want to put books in it. And if you want to take a look in this room, it is the bathroom now, but of course they did not have bathrooms at that time. But we got a nice corner cupboard here, and this is called a chamber pot, and this would be their toilet. This would be stored underneath the bed, so if you had to go use a toilet, you'd pull this out and use this in the middle of the night. Then the next morning, if you had children, it'd be their job to take it outside and clean it out so it wouldn't smell up the house. Especially in the winter, you didn't want to go outside and use the outhouse, which was like the portable pit toilets they have now. But there's no street lights or yard lights or electricity, so it's awful dark outside. So in the wintertime especially, you'd just use this inside where it wasn't quite so cold and dark. And on the table we have the wash bowl. You'd put water in the pitcher and have it sitting there, and if you were going to wash your hands or face, you'd pour the water into this bowl and you would wash up, then you would take and throw the water outside. So that's the wash bowl. We'll proceed now back out of this room and we'll go into the kitchen. And in the kitchen we have a typical kitchen stove, which this is a small kitchen, so we had a small kitchen stove here, and it would burn coal, wood, corn cobs, even hardened cow pies. Whatever they had, they would burn in it. And you would use this handle, lift the cover off and put the wood or whatever you had in here and light it. And then put the cover back on, and this is where all the cooking was done. And this is a toaster that would sit on the stove. And you would put the piece of toast or bread here and let it sit there for maybe 30 seconds, or depending on how hot the fire was. Then you would have to take and turn the bread around and toast the other side. And Stoughton takes credit for starting the coffee break, because in 1906 we had 22 tobacco warehouses along the railroad tracks down by the depot in that area. And the owners of the tobacco warehouses could not get enough men to come and sort tobacco. It was just a seasonal job. All the men were working at the Stoughton Wagon Works or the Mant Wagon Works. So they talked to the wives and asked the wives to come and work. And the wives never worked out of the home before. So they kept saying no, they didn't want to go to work. Well, finally the owners of the tobacco warehouses must have wore the wives down, because they consented to go to work for them under one condition. They could go home middle of the morning, at noon, and middle of the afternoon. And that way they could check on their children at home and check on the next meal, which was on the stove. And these stoves and the old big kitchen cook stoves always had a fire in them, always heat. So they had a big pot of coffee simmering on the stove. So when they went home to check on the children in the meal in the middle of the morning and so on, they would grab a quick cup of coffee while they were home checking, and supposedly that's how the coffee break started, right here in Stoughton, Wisconsin. And next to me we have a juicer here. You'd put the orange in here and squeeze it down, and the juice would come out this hole into a glass or a cup, whatever you had. And especially in the old farmhouse, out on the farm, on the kitchen table, you always had the silver in a glass like this. So when it was time to eat, the plates would be set on the table, and you would just reach for a spoon or fork or a knife, whatever you need, out of the water glass. That's where they were stored. And over here we have what's called a Hoosier, where you could store your dishes in it. We have some dishes there. And it would also have storage right here. There's a rack there for your dish towel. And some of them, I don't think, no, this one doesn't have it. No, just storage. Some of them even had a bin where you could store the flour for baking, but this one does not have it. And in the corner is the way they used to wash their clothes. They have this one is a wooden tub, and you heat the water on the stove and pour it in here, and you would use a scrub board. Take the clothes and rub it on the scrub board to get them clean. And in the wintertime, you would do that in the kitchen, because there's always heat in the kitchen from the kitchen stove, and it was close to keep the heating water. You'd have to go outside to the pump to get the water and carry it in a pail and put it on the stove and heat it, then dump it in here and add your soap. I guess that's pretty much all of the Stoughton House. We did, of course, modernize it so we could use it for special occasion. We, of course, have a refrigerator and a sink here, and that way it can be used. It's not the way Luke Stoughton originally built it, but at least it's usable for special occasions, maybe ice cream social or whatever we might decide to do. So I want to thank you for looking at this movie, and hope you learned something from it. Thank you so much.